Yes.
I'm also a licensed marriage and family therapist, which is why I was a little bit late today. I got caught up in some client work. Uh, I, in terms of work, I'm a direct to, I work multiple jobs, but one, I'm a clinical director at a university where I teach students how to do therapy. I also am a clinical director at a community mental health center in Oakland, which is Black, female owned and operated, where I have been working for 15 years as a clinical director as well. Um, and I do a lot of clinical supervision, which is actually my specialty. My specialty is analyzing clinical cases and figuring out human behavior. So some of it, I get to incorporate some spiritual work and interwoven intuition.
Can you make it a little louder?
Yeah.
Somehow.
Yeah, I'll do my best. My voice doesn't carry. So try to talk a little bit louder. So I interweave some of those concepts into my work. I also teach psychology classes and I also do therapy. So I do a lot of different things. None of them are really in the context of being trans necessarily. Most of my clients are heterosexual and straight. For some reason, that's just what I get. Sometimes I have a few queer clients I've had for a long time, but for the most part, it's pretty mixed. So I walk in the world as a trans person technically, but really I pass very well. And so I get a lot of projections based on who I am. So in terms of projection, this is really the core of all stereotypes, all racism, sexism, etc., all of the homophobia that kind of gets incorporated into our world comes from projection. And so I guess I'll give a little bit of a history of my trans experience and then kind of break down some more global trans nuances. I think that would be good. And how long do we have to?
Until the top of the hour. The meeting is 1 hour long.
Okay.
You can talk as long as you want in that time.
So as a young person, I was projected onto a lot. Jody, did you have a question or you're just unmuting? You're just stuck on a button.
Apologies.
Oh, okay, no problem. I just wanted to check. As a young person, I passed as a boy from quite an early age, around probably 2. I felt very much like a boy from a very young age. At 3, I was caught trying to pee standing up, and it was a big deal. Also, any kind of attempt to feminize me did not go over very well. I asked for a baseball glove at 3 and was just very athletic. So my gender has always been pretty consistent for me, but it's been very confusing for other people. So I was always identified as a queer kid from others, and I didn't really know what that meant. And I just really tried to walk in the world as who I was. So the one thing that was positive from it is that it taught me to just be who I am, because people are just going to think anything about you. Probably in high school, I started to dabble into queerness. I was going to church a lot. I was a Quaker. I was raised Quaker. And so I Started dating a married woman that was 10 years older than me in the church when I was a teen. And so that came to light. And then, yeah, so there was some upset about that from the preacher and from my mom and all that. But I did what I needed to do around queerness, went to a Quaker college. When I was going to a Quaker college, really realized that I needed to get out of there. And then I decided to start really kind of living a full queer life. So shortly after that, though, queerness alone, lesbianism didn't really fit. It didn't match. I always felt like there was something that was different, or that at least needed to be added to this experience. And so at 19, around 19 or 20, I came out as trans. And so I moved to California, transitioned around 25. I'm about to be 50, about 40, I'm about to be 49. So been living this life as a man for a really long time. What I noticed is that, you know, there's a lot of different experiences that I've had as a man that definitely confirm sexism in the world, that confirm power and privilege. That's different than what I experienced as a female. However, there are different layers of this that get complex that I probably can deconstruct a little bit. As a man who was raised female, I wasn't raised with the same toxic masculine expectations of shutting down emotion, not having access to communication. So it's very confusing still for people, when, especially men who, or even women, I guess, who try to come for me, even though that doesn't necessarily happen all the time. But having high verbal skills like a female, and having access to emotional content can be very confusing. So it's fascinating how little nuances there are in socialization. One of the biggest things that was more surprising coming into maleness was that even though I was a highly sexual person as a female, I guess, or asexual person that had access to my sexuality, testosterone definitely has a strong biological influence on the need for sex. So that was one curious thing that I found out when I transitioned that I thought was more socialized. I thought men were just socialized to be more sexual. And no, yes and no, but that the drive for sex, once it's leveled off now, of course, but taking testosterone definitely opened up my eyes around emotional content expression. I didn't cry anymore, even though the same content might make me feel different. I might watch, or make me feel the same, I should say. So I might watch something that normally I would cry just kind of automatically, and then testosterone, I might have the same feeling of sadness, but I'm not crying. And it's not because I don't want to be, you know, seen as weak. There isn't that. So there are biological components to transition that has been interesting, but the socialization is still pretty strong. Now I'm seen as a gay man in some places, and sometimes because I'm not super, I don't know, aggressive. And then sometimes I'm just seen as straight. So if I go into a queer place, even if it's a trans identified place, because I pass, I'm not seen as trans. If I walk into straight world, sometimes I'm seen as queer, in terms of being a gay man, which is fine, because I identify as bisexual. So it's been an interesting walk of life, to be able to be back to projected on so greatly. I think my biggest struggle now or complication is that those who know that I'm trans, once they know, they can only see that. That's the only thing they see now. It becomes the master status, which in sociology means your identifiers become more pronounced than your qualifications. So if you're a female, you're now a female doctor. You can't just be a doctor. If you're a psychologist, you can't just be a psychologist, you're a trans psychologist, or you're someone who specializes in trans topics or work, which is not necessarily true. My specialty is actually personality disorders and trauma. So, and that's not trans related. So right now, that's been an interesting issue. One of the things that I wanted to kind of maybe talk about is that the body gets over analyzed in this work. There's two things, there's two issues with trans people that get in the way of actually understanding the trans experience. One is the obsession with the body, not from the trans person, but from society. What surgeries have you had? How do you have sex? What your genitals look like? Do you have a dick? Do you not have a dick? Do you fuck? Do you get fucked? Those things are really perseveratory, I think, across the trans experience. In psychology, when I was doing my dissertation, which was a psychoanalytic dissertation on trans development, because I think that those concepts can be very much put together. And some of the research was absurd. So a lot of the research was trying to connect trans people with all these unusual things like amputating limbs and having sort of an erotic attachment to limbless people, having an erotic attachment to disability by cutting off one's penis. So there's been all kinds of associations with the body throughout research, and even now in discussions, it's about the bathroom, right? It's about sort of this obsession around trans people using the bathroom. Where do they go to the bathroom, especially trans kids? And this notion that one might, a male, born male, might go through an entire transition to just use the women's bathroom to be perping on women. Anyone ever notice that the bathrooms are not locked? That at any time men can go into women's bathrooms. They do not need to transition to go into a women's bathroom. And it's quite a costly experience to go through all of that, to go into a women's bathroom to peep on women. Trans people just want to pee. So that's been an obsession with society, and it's still associated with the body. The second part of it is that, are we human? Are trans people human? Meaning, do they deserve or have access to rights? Do they deserve the right to play sports, which is the most common recent issue? Trans sports, where do trans people go? Well, why don't you create trans sports in college instead of just making it so binary? Where does the third gender go to play sports? And as someone who's a former athlete, playing lots of different sports, but I played softball and fast pitch softball in college, where would I play, right? And no one was fucking crying when I was a girl beating out all the boys on a little league team because there wasn't softball teams for girls, because why would girls be doing that? No one was crying then when I was beating all the boys out for their positions and playing in center field. So that's really kind of been pissing me off, to be honest, these days, is the sports issue. But in addition to rights, do you have the right to go to the military? Even though I don't want to fucking go to the military. Also, do you have the right to work, live, be housed, be in love, etc. So um, those are the two concepts I think people get really focused on, both the body and like, do you have rights and where do you fit in? And so that's pretty typical of my experience throughout, even in spiritual communities, having a madrina say before you're getting made into, or we're supposed to be made, I need to know exactly what your genitals look like so that I know what I'm dealing with when I go to make you. And it's like, okay, because you're going to be naked and who God knows what. So there's all
Holy
kinds.
shit. I did not know that. Holy shit.
And then when you set boundaries, they're like crying and falling apart because, oh, God, boo-hoo. So um, there's lots of things, which is probably one of the reasons why I didn't actually get made, just because it felt, I know that that person has a lot of trauma anyways that they need to work on still. But yeah, it doesn't feel very safe in communities, right, for trans people. And there's lots of ways to be discreet and to be compassionate about someone's body experience, even if they're not trans, right? There's ways to help them cover up or help people have, you know, their dignity. So for me, I've had a lot of different discriminatory experiences. One of the main things that I think that people mistake for trans men in particular, I'm talking about Santeria getting made to an Orisha. So I'm just talking about spiritual communities, initiations. So for trans men in particular, I think they get a lot of crap about like becoming men, especially from the feminist community, and all of the privileges that they get. And there are perceived privileges that trans men do get when they're passing and they're not out. People come up to me for directions. I don't fucking know. I don't know. Pull out your GPS. I have no idea where to go. So why you're asking me for directions, but people will ask me. And it took a lot of sort of transition too for me to be like, understand sort of the expectation of men. What I also understood is that people expect me to take up a lot of space in a room, in a meeting, in a group, as a man. So it's interesting how much also men's anger and irritability is tolerated versus women's, and that men are expected to be angry and irritable as the only form of expression and emotion that they can share. So that's been fascinating. But what I will say is that trans men actually, maybe they might get some privileges, but they still have to go to the doctor. And so one of the, I think, unspoken discriminatory things that trans people have to face is at the doctor, because there's different medical components to the transition, but then there's the entire body. And I think people get really focused on the transition. I've been to the doctor before where I had some random immunity thing for a second because of some meds I was on, but I didn't connect the two. And so my foot, I had an ingrown toenail that got infected. And I went to the doctor for it, and they were like, why are you here? Why aren't you at a specialty clinic? I'm like, what kind of special clinic? For like your people, trans people? What the hell? What does that have to do with my foot? That has nothing to do. And so trans people have labeled this phenomenon as the broken arm syndrome, that a trans person might have a broken arm, but they're not going to be seen as having a broken arm. They're going to be seen as, you know, a trans person with a broken arm, then it might be caused by something else. Same happens in therapy, where trans people might want to come in and work on mourning, grieving, complicated relationships, loss, etc. But the therapist wants to hyper focus on the transition or the body or where you're at in transition, etc., etc. So I think that I would like us to start, us as in society, having more complex conversations with trans people with gender variant folks around other things other than this basic stuff. And the reason why we keep it basic is so we don't have to have those conversations. So if trans speakers who come in and educate, and I'm not talking about myself here right now, but I mean in general, like at schools or at workplaces, and they still have to keep going over definitions, we're never going to get anywhere, right? Because there are so many nuances within our community that make that we really could delve into the complexity of a trans person, like asking them, what is it like to be, what is your experience like in walking these different worlds, right? And what are some things that we could work on in our society? Or what are the nuances in the trans community? What's the tea, right? What's the current politics within your own communities? And having more higher end conversations, which is really why I wanted to do a dissertation based on like, what is it like for transition psychologically, as opposed to, do people have the right to transition? Do children have the right to access knowledge about their bodies? So we don't even have that information. We don't have trans folks don't have a lot to access other than the oversaturated book library of trans narratives. So we are inundated with I think, autobiographies of the trans experience. That's nice, and I think it's important, but I think we also need to start having higher scholarship, higher thinking, higher level conversations other than, this is my experience. That's still basic 101. So there's sort of that direction that I feel like we can move away from. So I know this is a group in which you're supposed to listen, but I also want to know where you're at, because everyone's knowledge varies, right? And we can't assume that the Bay Area, that people know in the Bay Area or in other urban areas everything about trans folks, and then some people know less and some people know more. So would anyone like to ask any questions or have any statements or contributions they would like to say? And that might be breaking the rules, but let's break some rules.
I really like what you just said about I think what I'm hearing you say is that there's a obsession with individualism with regards to the individual experience, whereas the conversations, like, we need to talk about policy, the bigger picture, how to provide a different framework than the colonized heteronormative one. And maybe, so did I understand that? Your last comment, is that what I understood you saying?
Yeah, more specifically, like, which I'm glad it kind of sparked something that I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's a very white, very hetero experience where trans people are expected, when they go into transition, and not this area, my area, Bay Area, but other areas, to claim, and this has been very historical, heterosexuality in order to transition. And instead of being on the binary. For example, if a trans person maybe wants to only have a little bit of the surgeries and maybe a little bit of the hormone, but be kind of more in the middle, that's not always seen as acceptable in other places. And then also in the past, and it's changing, but in the past, you've had to claim heterosexuality in order to transition, meaning if you were male transitioning to female, you would have to date men as opposed to continuing to date women. So there are so many layers of culture and class in the trans community that we don't get to because we're too busy trying to define if are trans people human. And so I think the best thing to note is that there's complexity, just like in our society, in these communities that we don't get to. One of the greatest shows. Anyone seen the series Pose? Um, this is a show that's on Netflix now. It's also on Apple TV. That's on Netflix and it's available to watch. And the great thing about it is that even though it's based in the 80s and it's based off Paris is Burning, it's based off New York City, where there were these things called ballrooms, and then people had houses. This is very similar to Santeria, where there's a house mother and they're taking all these strays, basically, all these queer youth from the streets, and they're very black and brown oriented. And it was the first show, and also the first time that I was like, thank you, God, that we're talking about complexity here, and that they really broke down the expectations of passing, right, in the community, the expectations of, making it out of the trans ghetto, like the Tenderloin, basically, and sort of the peers and New York City. Getting out of that and moving up classes was always a goal. And that always like also passing as white, or at least getting into that world. And so it was the first time that you really could see a layered conversation around transness. Also, it helps that there are trans actors that play trans characters and to make it more real. And so one poignant moment was when sort of when sort of the ballrooms are kind of moving out of existence and moving more into mainstream. There was a conversation around how one of the main character was attacking one of the trans women all the time. And then he was able to, unfortunately, after she died in the show, talk about how he was jealous that she expressed femininity, that she was loud and she was black and she was proud, and that he had all this internalized homophobia, racism, sexism, that he wasn't able to work through. And that's the kind of layeredness that I'd like to get to in conversations with trans folks, so that we actually start seeing the other, the trans other, as a whole being and not this compartmentalized individual who is just about the body, who's just about genitals. And I don't know how many people have asked me about genitals, including a therapist, like I said, spiritual house, other people. And what, are we having sex right now? Why do you need to know? Right? So everyone's genitals are different all the time until we get used to them, until we get familiar with them and we understand them. But if a person who's non-trans identified had as many questions about their genitals as trans people, they would lose their shit. Would you have conversations with non-trans people and ask how big their pussy lips are? No, that would be like, what the fuck, right? You'd be like a perv. Or like, how big is your dick? It'd be like, excuse me? But trans people get so used to being intruded upon and violated, and they come from an educative perspective, usually, of acceptance of like, this is my experience, or they have to work really hard at setting a boundary around it. And even when we say like Janet Mock or Laverne Cox, every other interview they have to set boundaries around having these conversations around their genitals. And there are people who, are being asked these questions all the time. So it's absurd. It's also absurd that, say we weren't talking about genitals and we were talking to a trans person and we wanted to know what was on their mind or what kind of things do they want to, discuss. It's like if you were talking to a non-trans person and you just kept talking to them about their gender, what is it like to be a woman? What is it like to be a man all the time? It'd be like, holy shit, what? So I think we need to move out of compartmentalizing folks. And this is true of POC as well. This is true of other isms. just like if you were in a wheelchair, if you had disabilities, people don't want to always be compartmentalized to this one thing. And we don't do that with majority folks. We don't do that with other people. So that is the biggest thing I think that we need to work on in our society. And in addition, it's not easy to do. I will say we have to work on it, but we want to really make the person feel whole. Any other statements or questions? Anyone?
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Ellen, I just wanted to clarify that really you're not expected to speak the whole hour. I think for me, part of the reason why we're inviting people to come here and share with us is so that we do have an opportunity to ask questions and get more information, you know. So it's not at all breaking the rules to open up for that. I'm just really present, and I don't, you know, I guess I'm going to make it about me. But like, what freaking privilege I have that I don't have to worry about those conversations, man. Like, I walk through the world and I'm a, you know, heterosexual, middle-aged woman, and nobody's concerned, you know, I'm concerned about my body maybe, but like, you know, nobody else is asking me those questions. And I get it. I would really, I don't know what to do for me. Like, I don't know what to do to bring that conversation out into my community. Like, I live in upstate New York. It's pretty rural here. I don't encounter people who are trans very often. I don't know like how many trans people there are. It just bothers me too, like that trans has to be a label, just like Black has to be a label. Like, what is up with our language that people get identified by these pieces of themselves, or it just bothers me. So I'm kind of rambling at the moment, but I just want a world where everybody can just be human, like just be. I just want a world where people can just be. And I'm here to learn about what I can do to support that. So thank you.
Well, I don't imagine you're going to be doing much, and that's okay, because you also, it's not about that. It's really just about having an understanding, and that if you have relationships with others who fit these categories, that you're able to learn from them, and you know, then also they can learn from you. And also, we all have privileges, and we all have things that are not privileged. So I can walk in the world, and if people don't know I'm trans, then I have a lot of privilege, I suspect.
So privilege is not intrinsically bad. Like, I think, you know, it can be like the privilege is intrinsically bad, and there's something to do about that. And I hear, you know, that it's who I be with people that I encounter. But I also feel like I have some responsibility to share things that I learn with other people who may not know, may not encounter people who are trans. And I'm happy to share my knowledge, you know, share what I learn with people, and help to educate the world in whatever ways I can about things.
I mean, I know, Jody, you're about to say something, but I'll just respond real quick. I don't feel guilty at all about having privilege. I don't give a fuck. I didn't ask to be raised white. But you know, if I'm not going to be aware of it, and I'm not going to be aware of when other people don't have it, and I'm going to use it to exploit and to have power, then that's a problem. The work around privilege is just knowing that you have it and knowing when people don't, and then also trying to use it for ways in which you can do good. And sometimes you can, and sometimes you can't. You can talk about you can talk to your next door neighbor, Jimmy, Joe, or whatever, but that doesn't mean they're going to hear you. So, you can just do the best that you can to have the knowledge and share it when you can, but people aren't always going to take it in and hear it. Jody, what were you going to say?
I'm not sure. So lots of grief just went through me and it's going through me. And I'm calling to my filter guide and it's not filtering. So I'm really struck by, hearing you speak it's a totally new world for me. But what I get is the box that you're put in, everyone's put in a box. We're all in the same damn box that oppresses us differently, but oppressed. And this grief is just pouring through me. There was some rage too at first, but mostly it's just grief. And so it must be everyone in the room because I'm the canary in the room. And yeah. And I'm just, I don't know. I'm not so struck by my ignorance because I know about my ignorance. I know I'm ignorant. I think what is coming through to me powerfully, which is surprising, is an empowering stance, which is we're all in the same different box. We're all, so what that I'm, white, heterosexual, you know what I mean? And I'm aware of my privilege and I use it when I can. It's that we're all in the same box. So to me, it's about being who we are. Like everyone really being who we really are, if I get to be who I really am, whatever the freaking thing that looks like, then I give everyone else permission to do that. And everyone else gets to be who they really are. And just by being, I mean, I don't know, and it's just very freeing that you say that, because then it opens it up for me too. I'm the closet, psychic in the family, medium, energy healer or whatever. No one has a freaking clue. Dead people talk to me. You know what I mean? No one has a freaking clue in my family about any of this stuff. I mean, really. I talk to trees. Trees are my best friends. You know what I mean? Like no one knows any of this stuff, and it's just like I get to be me. Like walking down the street yesterday, and there's this tree. I was like, okay, I'm gonna go hug that tree because that tree's telling me to hug it. So if I get to be me, then I give permission to everyone else to be them. I don't know. And then I can acknowledge my ignorance. Like, I mean, in being raised in the culture we're in, I had to look at my sexuality and go, okay, well, is this just because I'm enculturated into this, or is this who I really am? And I've been looking at that, but I mean, the things that you raise, I'm like, oh my God. I don't know what else to say about it other than I'm not shocked. I'm appalled, but I'm not shocked. And I don't know where to go from there other than thank you very much. And I'm horrified about the doctor stuff, really. Horrified. I mean, I was trained as one and nobody ever talked about any of this stuff. So
We have a couple others that want to get in there.
I would like to ask a question, please. You were talking about higher level scholarship to inform the trans community, and I was wondering if you could give an example of any work that's currently being done that you think that we should take a look at.
Well, recently I came across a few things related to the gatriarchy, which I thought was like so cute. Like, because it's talking about what I've been really kind of wishing that we would get into, which is, oh, well, now you can get married, but now, and this has been present for a long time around the gatriarchy and queer community around, there's certain even conforming aspects within the communities. I don't know the work. I'll have to look it up and send it to Leslie to send along. But it was an article that I'd read recently. And so that's one aspect of like conformity within the community. And that's been kind of true for the history of the queer community, anyways, where certain queers are trying to conform and to be very, I guess, normal, white, or to be not out there. And so people who were dressing in drag were always looked down upon. People who were trans have always been looked down upon within the community. Um, so that's one area that's been of interest to me lately is the gaytriarchy. And then also just how class plays out in our community has always been interestingly layered, right? Also, one area that I think I was thinking about the other day would be interesting to dive into is around the gentrification of queers, where we come in and make things pretty, and then straight people come in and try to kick us all out. So we come into like broken down communities that are ugly and worn down and crime ridden, and we make it beautiful again because we can see the potential in broken things. And then straight people try to come in and try to take it all away. So I think that's been on my mind recently. So I want to look into that as well. So I don't have anything other than those recently, and I'd have to look up on some research around those things.
Thank you. I feel you on the patriarchy. It's really evident where I live, which is in Paris. There's a gayborhood, but the gayborhood is really only for gay men. It's really not for anybody else in the queer community, which is lame because there's tons of other people in the queer community.
Another that's been on my mind is about toxic femininity, and that how sort of over conforming to feminine principles can contribute to patriarchy as well, and that every time that patriarchy only exists because women also buy into it. And so that's been interesting to me about how that plays out in the queer community, and about how we are striving towards, adoption rights and marriage rights when we still have so many people that are, we have our trans sisters who are POC being killed at high rates. We have people who are starving within the queer community who are still really homeless and don't have access to housing and food. So any other questions, comments?
Yeah, I had a question coming up while you were talking. Because even gentrification is moving in between worlds, right? And so I found myself wondering how it affects your spiritual practice to, in almost every case, be moving to bridge worlds,
It's kind of like what I do, which I like. So I know I've had some readings where it's been like, you walk between two worlds, like, yeah, you kind of have to filter out the person and the spirit too. So, but it's true. I've been thinking about that lately as well. Around trans people do walk between so many different worlds. They kind of come in and they come out, and that they tend to be. This is why in other cultures they tend to be more of the shamans, and they get more respect around their spiritual strengths. Not so much here, but I do feel like it helps because I get the sense that trans people have like, and I feel like I have like x-ray vision in a sense where I can just see, um, I can see people. And also transitioning and changing all the time that's a big strength that I think people don't actually think about too often, right? And so even in my work, I'm used to coming in, and if there's a bunch of chaos and there's so much stuff that's broken and crazy, I come in and I just clean it up. and I can make change, because it's usually in environments that like people are stuck, they can't move. And this happens in my therapeutic work as well. I help people make change, and that being the stable figure while chaos is going on around me. Um, I think a lot of trans people, when they're not too traumatized, and that's hard to find, but can do that work too, where they can be in the center of hurricanes and make change and movement and energy shifts when they are secure in themselves. The problem is that they're so beaten down sometimes, and they're so overladen with you're not good enough, or you're not human even, that it's hard for trans folks to just notice their own gifts that are laying right there with them, within them. But it does help, I think, being who I am, being able to transition and shift and be okay with whatever people are going to say and think about me, because it changes from person to person. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question as well. Thank you for what you expressed. The more you spoke, the more I realized that I watched posts, I watched other stuff, and I started getting bits of information about trans people, because my first encounter with a person who was openly trans, that I remember I was at university, it was over 20 years ago. But from that encounter, I got a lot of information, and I got the opportunity to experience somebody that and then later I realized that outside of that environment, it became really hard to find trans people around me because of the environment I move. And maybe they were, but it wasn't that they would say it openly. So especially recently, I made myself to go there, and I realized I have a big gap in knowledge, because I do read trans people, but I realize it's mostly trans women or gender non-conforming people who also call themselves trans, but not really trans men. And even Pose was about trans women for the most part, and not without. And I'm not saying that it didn't delve into really deep stuff. For me, I found that show like, oh my God, like this, they're having discussions that I wish as a cis person, I had those discussions with people around me. And they had that, the fact that they have the houses and all that, for me, it was illuminating. So my question is, what are good resources to learn about trans people that are not only trans women?
One, I want to speak to the reason why I think that occurs. And always goes back to the patriarchy. And the reason why is because society, I think, believes, wow, that's really unusual. Why would a man want to become a woman and lose privilege and be those things that women are, less than? But people think and assume that they know that, oh, it makes sense why a woman would want to become a man. So it doesn't seem as unusual, actually, even though it's still not respected and still not, still a lot of discrimination. But I think psychologically, it's like, well, of course you want to be a man, because who wouldn't want to be a man? And so it's not seen as, as eccentric or as unusual as it does for trans women. And also trans women, they walk a harder life because they've already gone through puberty. It's harder for them to transition and to conform and to pass as women, unless they're smaller build and they kind of already have the genetics to not have a lot of hair already and to kind of look naturally feminine. So it's harder for trans women in this world, and they get clocked more often, meaning they get outed more often as trans people, and as opposed to not passing. So their experience, I think, becomes a little bit more sensationalized. There's also erotic components to it as well. related to genitalia, the assumptions of it. But in terms of trans men, I think to know there's a book that just second edition came out. Trans Bodies Ourselves. I have to look it up. Hold on. It's just about to come out this week. It's Trans Bodies, Trans Selves, second edition. And so it's coming out this week. Also, if you want to learn about transgender children, my wife is an author of The Transgender Child, and her second edition book is coming out in May called The Transgender Child, with Stephanie Brill and Rachel Pepper. And but I think Trans Bodies, Trans Selves is a good one. There's lots of online access to trans men and their narratives. There's actually more narratives coming from trans men than there are, I think, trans women. So I probably would just pick up a few of those books or one and start there. They're pretty similar. I can also send you a list of resources too, of things to check out, stories to watch too, as well. There's a documentary from my wife's friend called Self-Made Man about a guy in Connecticut who runs art groups with trans children and who transitioned himself. So there's different media as well that I can send you. Any other things?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, well, if there's no other questions or statements, I'll let you guys go.
Yeah, thanks very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Thanks for talking to us. Have a great rest of your day.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Quite
Thanks for
inspiring.
coming. It's so great to see you.
Nice to see you.
And we should do that more often.
Yeah, we should catch
And
up.
I'm so glad you could come, and the things that I'm taking away are like the privilege of just not having to think about privilege. The biggest privilege of any kind is not having to think about that, all the time. And then really our work is to start connecting with people on a deeper level, period. Stop paying so much attention to everybody's genitals. Get your mind out of the gutter and we'll all be fine. It's really straightforward. And I just remember that about you, that like what Jody said, like, and it may or may not have anything to do with the transness. It's just, it feels good to be around someone who is fine with being themselves, no matter what happens, and just that is really empowering. Yeah.
Appreciate that. And it's been a long time since I've seen you, so hopefully we'll catch up soon. And where are you staying at now?
I'm in Mexico. I'm in Puerto Vallarta
Okay.
until October. Come on down.
Yeah, well, we've been trying to plan a trip, so we might be going down there, so we'll catch up. All right, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I'll be in touch with some resources that you can access if you want, and we'll see you later.